Hello and welcome to Super Pump. Today we have Packy McCormick. Welcome, Packy.
Good to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
We're very excited to have you. And, ever since Tanmay and I read the Great Online Game, we're like, this is such an incredibly good framework to discuss everything that's going on in remote work, in crypto, and just freelance work that's turned into some sort of a, athletic, freelancing. And so we want to discuss all these themes with you. So welcome and thanks for being here. Maybe why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what you do, and then we can get right into the essay.
For sure. So my name's Packy. I write a newsletter called NotBoring and invest a little bit in startups as well. And really, I didn't start NotBoring with a theme. I started NotBoring kind of interested in tech and strategy, and it's kind of evolved over time. And one of the veins that I've really started to tap into recently is this idea that, we're playing this great online game together, and we can dive into kind of why I think that. But that has all sorts of implications. Like yesterday, I wrote a piece about cooperation online and how people are forming these super teams together online. And so it kind of builds on itself. But I think a lot of this comes from the fact that stuck inside, I've been spending probably way too much time online. And it's been, the best year ever for my career. And I think, there's different ways to do it. Not everyone has to create media. Not everyone, there's a million different ways to play this. But I do think that, there's just this world of billions and billions of people online, and it's easier than ever to find kind of your niche if you're doing it with a little bit of intentionality.
Awesome. So do you want to maybe contextualize why you call it a game and what the game itself is?
For sure. Yes, I call it a game. So I saw this tweet by Nick Milanovic that said, sometimes it's weird to remember that we're all effectively competing to hit the right keys on our keyboards in the right order. And if we do that for long enough, then we get to buy a house. And I thought that was such a funny way to describe work. And I had written about gaming before, and I remember the definition, so I went and looked that up too. And the definition of a video game is a game played by electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a television screen or other display screen. And so I was like, damn, you combine these two things, and what we do for work every day, particularly when you're remote, really does feel like a video game. And so, like, what else does that imply? How is a game designed? What are people optimizing for in a game? How are the best games designed? So we can go into that a little bit, but I love this podcast that Josh Buckley did with Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and he talked about a few things. One, that the best games are designed to kind of put people in flow. And if anybody spent a lot of time on Twitter or in Reddit or in wherever else, I think you can get kind of lost in there for a really long time. So either that's kind of like mindless scrolling and addiction, and that's probably the negative way to look at it. And the positive way is that you're just in flow in this kind of global conversation. I think it depends how you kind of filter your social channels. He actually said that, himself said that Twitter and Facebook and all these platforms are kind of like these very big video games. And he mentioned kind of the four elements of successful game design, which are frequent feedback loops, variable outcomes, a sense of control, and connection to a metagame. And I think all of those kind of exist when you're doing something online. That could be building a company online. That could be you have a full-time job, but you're following a passion online. And maybe you tweet something and it works and it gets a lot of likes, and maybe it doesn't, and then you learn from that, and it's a really fast feedback loop and you keep going. But I think the most interesting thing is the fact that there's this connection to the metagame. So the things that you do online that feel an awful lot like you're playing a video game actually have an impact on your bank account and your life and who you meet and your friends. And so I think that's kind of the connection that I made, was that you're doing all these things on a computer, but they have real world outcomes, and there's just this massive upside to doing it right. Obviously, you can be canceled, and I know that Balaji, replied to me and was like, mostly agree with this, but this is why pseudonyms are important, because there is some downside if you play the game wrong. But I think for the most part, as long as you're not doing anything crazy, mostly upside. And if you are going to play a little bit more extreme, there are options like pseudonyms and all of that to play that way.
Amazing. Do you think the game begins on Twitter, because you had several references there, or is there what is the spawning location for the game?
Oh, interesting. So I think it really depends, and I think the problem with a lot of my writing, I would say, is that it's a lot, it's often from my own perspective, and so for some people it's it's Reddit, for other people it's Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, or I think there are different spawning points for different people depending on kind of what you're trying to get into. I think for for our world, we met on Twitter, and I've met a ton of great people. So if you're interested in kind of tech and finance and all of that, there's these really great either major communities or sub-communities, depending on what you're interested in on Twitter. And I think, there's only 300 million or so monthly active users, but they're like mostly the types of people that, like, pretty much anybody that I'd want to interact with professionally is somewhat on Twitter.
Actually, before we dive deeper, Akshay, I actually wanted to ask Packy, right? Because the majority of people who are going to be watching this, they're not going to be people who have read the essay. So what would be an interesting pitch that you have seen people quote RTU and say, hey, you should read this? What's like the best, 1 or 2 line pitch that you can tell people why you should read the essay immediately?
You definitely need to read the essay. No, I'm kidding. But I think the thing that resonated the most with people is that I think it gave people a sense of agency and this optimistic take on spending all of this time online. I think over the past year particularly, a lot of us have spent a ton of time online, and I think this frames it in a way and kind of puts agency back in the hand of people where you can actually get a lot of positive benefits out of doing it, and it's not just mindless scrolling. So I think the biggest thing that I heard from people was like, wow, you've encouraged me to jump in and actually start playing the game. And so I think hopefully this essay is just a starting point for people to go out there and start interacting and finding their niches. And I do want to say, like, this is not about racking up followers or getting as many likes as possible. Like, that is not the goal here at all. If you find one follower, but that person, is somebody who you've always respected or who can give you a job or who you can collaborate on something with, like, that is an absolute win. If you find a Discord community that you just want to kind of participate in, and then you get involved in a project that becomes your life's work, like, all of that kind of can start. And so it's not about just accumulating followers and likes for their own sake. It's really about just kind of increasing your surface area to open yourself up to different, positive opportunities. So that was a much more than 2-sentence pitch, but that's my pitch.
Yeah.
Let me. It reminds me of one tweet, Tanmay, I thought that was interesting from Naval, which is what actually I tweeted under Packy's essay. But it was, life is a search for who and what need you the most. And if that is true, then one of the ways of doing that is increasing the surface area of opportunity to open up yourself to the world. And playing the game could be one of the ways of you finding who and what need you the most. So that's probably why it's worth reading the essay, because you might find what you're really truly meant for.
That is a much better pitch than mine.
All right. So the first, there are 5 key questions that we need to ask. And the first one being, what is a video game?
Yeah. So the video game is digitally manipulating objects on a screen. And so that's kind of what we're doing when we tweet, when we write in a Google Doc, when we're on Slack, when we're in Figma, when you're in any one of these things that you do for work, like, that's kind of a video game, in the just most literal definitional sense of the word. And so that's not too far a leap to start kind of, applying other game mechanics to the way that you interact online.
Got it. Okay. And what is the great online game?
Yeah, so the great online game is an infinite video game that plays out constantly across the internet. And so it uses a lot of the mechanics of a video game, but it removes some of the boundaries. So if you're, playing Fortnite, there's a world there. I guess if you're playing Roblox, it's maybe a little bit of a better comp because you can build some of your own worlds. But the interesting thing about the great online game is that you can jump from world to worlds, and you can make friends in Fortnite and bring them over to Twitter and go to a Discord and launch a crypto project together. And so it's this boundaryless kind of thing where, it's almost, I guess, kind of metaverse-y like, but it doesn't look like this kind of 3D immersive metaverse that people think. And it doesn't have all maybe the connections that the ultimate metaverse will have among the different pieces. But it really is this kind of big, fluid, open thing where you can accumulate points and make friends and join guilds and go on missions together. And I think it's a more fun way to look at all of the things that maybe seem like, drudgery or doom scrolling.
How important is it to have like an objective before you start playing the game, right? Like, is it possible to discover your objective as you're playing the game?
100%. And I think, my playing of the game is certainly just an ongoing kind of discovery about things that I'm interested in, or quests that I want to go on, or people that I want to interact with. So I think when I started using Twitter, it really in earnest a couple of years ago, like, I had no idea what I was doing there. I liked talking about Philadelphia sports, and then kind of evolved from there and found things that I was interested in. So you can do it totally random, just like kind of observe for a while, I think, and then maybe jump in when it makes sense. Or you can go in and say, like, look, I know I'm into finance. I know that the job that I have at this bank right now doesn't work. I know there's a lot of smart people in finance on Twitter, and I know that I'm smart and I'm smarter than I'm getting recognition for at work. I'm going to start putting my work out there. And then people are going to see it, and then I'll find a new job, or I'll be able to raise my own fund, or I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z thing. So you can go in with a very specific objective, or you can go in and just kind of figure out what it is as you go.
Akshay, are we playing a game with Super Pumped?
I think so. As I think about this, like, we don't know why we're doing this entirely, but we know that it's interesting and it's important, right? And those two things kind of guide us to do as long as we continue doing things that satisfy those two criteria, it's fun, right? And that's why it's infinite, I guess, when you talk about it, because it leads to new opportunities when you meet new entrepreneurs. Like, this conversation may not have happened because of Superpower. Maybe this leads to something else. You never know. And so it's kind of like the game is revealing itself as you're playing it. Right,
100%. And I got a little bit of heat for my definition for calling the great online game an infinite game, because people who've read James Carr said no, there's one infinite game and it's life and whatever, and so there can't be a second infinite game. But I think that this kind of just takes that infinite game and makes it more global, right? Like, where, for the vast majority of human history, you were born somewhere, you had a certain set of kind of resources, you knew a certain group of people, and you could play within that small arena, and you could play the infinite game there. Now, it's just expanded to, not 7 billion people, because not everybody's online, but 4 billion, 5 billion people who are online, and, and different opportunities and new types of jobs and new types of employment opportunities. So I think it's this big kind of thing that, like, it's almost impossible to plan for, because it's such a massive, sprawling thing.
Yeah, and in fact, like, imagine the game that you, like, 10 years ago, you'd be in a city, so your game is restricted to that city. Then you'd be inside a company, so now your game is restricted to the people in a building. And then your game is restricted, and you're in in like a team, maybe on the product team or marketing team for like 2 years. It's not like you can do product today and marketing tomorrow. Like, Tanmay right now is recording this. After this, he's going to go record a course on how to trade in the stock market. And then the day after, he's going to go record, like a PUBG game streaming with a bunch of friends. And then after that, play chess. So I think the universe of games you can play is infinite, right? And that's that's what I loved about the essay. It just contextualized how working in a company, in a team, narrows the number of games you can play.
100%. And I expanded on this in the post that I wrote yesterday on cooperation. But, like, really, if you've worked at a big company and just come in, you, like, very clearly have a limited role. If you've had the experience of being at a startup early, you kind of start with this broad role where it's like, I don't know, go figure things out. And then over time, it narrows and narrows and narrows. And there are more people who are saying, no, that's my job, and your job is this. And so, like, as your thing gets more successful, your scope narrows. Or, the publishing industry is the industry that I think people talk about a lot here, because it's just really easy, right? Like, I have a newsletter that I write with my fingers on a keyboard, and then it goes out via, email. Like, there's nothing complicated about it. And so it's easy to see what's kind of happening in publishing. But, like, if you're in the New York Times and you're a columnist on something, like, you show that, like, sliver of yourself to the world. And then, like, all this other stuff is almost, like, contractually obligated to be hidden away. I think the New York Times said that, like, its writers can't do super follows. So, like, you see this very, very small sliver, and people have these 3D things. And I think the interesting thing about what's been happening over the past decade or so, and even over the past couple of years in particular, is that you're able to kind of, express and even monetize all those different pieces and, like, the whole package of yourself, which I think is really a pretty great thing.
You actually said in the essay that the game rewards community and cooperation over individualism and competition.
Yes.
Which slightly goes against the grain of traditional wisdom, which would say individualism should be rewarded.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So I wrote about this again yesterday because I wanted to expand on this topic. And I think what it means, like, you need to be a differentiated individual. Like, you need to figure out what you're really good at. Just like in a game, you're going to have different attributes and different strengths. similarly, people are going to act that way online. But what I mean is, like, I think it's a lot easier for people to coordinate and cooperate with each other than it is for companies to coordinate. Like, if you've ever done a BD deal, they take forever. And there's all these, you have to bring in the lawyers, and you have to, like, maybe the company's priorities change and someone gets fired, and so the deal doesn't happen and whatever. And with people, you can find someone who might be really helpful for this project that you're working on right now, DM them. Like, this conversation, for example, like, if we all had PR teams, this would have taken forever to schedule, and we'd have set talking points and all of that. Whereas here, we can say, like, cool, you guys have an audience, I have a story to tell, like, right now, let's team up on that, and I think we can produce something pretty cool together. And I think you can see that happening across a bunch of different areas. So if you want to play it alone, and just, like, it's all about you, and the goal is to get a lot of followers, and all, like, great. But I think you can really kind of multiply, and people are able to just, like, fit nicely together and form these kind of online super teams of people with different skills and strengths and abilities. Like, I think DAOs are a really interesting example here. Decentralized autonomous organizations, or digital organizations generally. Where I was listening to a podcast with a couple of people who started the LAO, and they were saying that, and the LAO is essentially like, the LAO and Flamingo DAO will invest in NFTs or crypto projects or whatever else. And they were saying, like, there's really nothing that we miss. Like, there's no trend in crypto that we don't see, because we have this group of people, some of whom are engineers, some of whom are investors, some of whom are artists. And so, one, somebody's going to have their finger on the pulse on everything. And then two, we're going to have this team that's able to kind of analyze any of the opportunities that come across from a million different perspectives. And, like, what we get out of that is a richer opportunity set, and then a richer ability to act on that opportunity set than any of us could ever do alone.
So I feel like I have been playing the game for a while, right? Like, for example, like he said, Akshay, AIB, which was a comedy collective that I used to run, was one of the first YouTube channels in India, and we got access to Bollywood stars through Twitter. It was for the first time people's minds were blown that, because we didn't have SNL in India, so Bollywood stars never did sketches, they were only seen in movies, and all of a sudden we started featuring them in online sketches, and we were able to do that directly. And then eventually, a lot of stuff, it's been years since then. I guess my question to you is, the more entrenched you get in the game, the higher the entropy in your life, the more chaotic your life becomes. How does one deal with that? How do you keep the game simple enough for you?
Yeah, I'm a bad person to ask this question to, because I just kind of lean into the entropy and have given up kind of on saying, like, this is my focus, and I'm going to Pomodoro today and really just focus on it. Like, I'm terrible at that. I don't know how I actually write anything, because my focus gets kind of split into a bunch of different ways. I think you have to understand, like, kind of what you want to get out of it, and, like, understand kind of what your main thing is right now. And so for me, that's writing and investing. So most of my calendar looks like I'm either writing, or I'm talking to a company that I might invest in, or helping that company. But I'm leaving space as well, even if that space is on my calendar next week or whatever, for other interesting opportunities that come up. And I think the better your current things are going, the more of a filter you have to let other things in. But there are going to be some just really cool opportunities that come in, and you're like, yes, okay, of course. Now 10% of my time goes to this thing as well. So I think just kind of the bar naturally raises for things that you're willing to let in, as the things that you're doing now continue to take up more time.
I think a good parallel would be GTA, right? Like GTA 5, right? For example, where it's like this game where broadly you're going to level up, right? But that broad leveling up doesn't happen without just wandering around the city, looking for opportunity, just time where you do nothing but drive, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
People ask me about my writing process all the time, and, like, where I come up with ideas for things and all of that. And, like, the answer is really, I just spend a lot of time on Twitter, and then, like, at some point something hits the right spot in my brain. I'm like, oh, that would be an interesting thing to write about. Or, like, I think there's these 75 things that hit my brain, and, like, if you combine them in this weird way, like, then there's something maybe to write about.
Yeah. This is what I think to myself when I'm procrastinating, that actually
100%.
I'm just feeding my right brain, so at some point some dots connect and there's some output that's ingenious.
Yeah, the whole point of the Great Online Game, I think, was me just justifying all of the time that I spend procrastinating on Twitter.
Okay, got
I mean, in fact, like, the thing with, I think it also selects for people who play the game for a long time and on different axes. Like, Tanmay is I love working with him because he's probably one of the best players, so to speak, right? Because he can go from media to advising a founder to investing with equal ease.
Yeah.
Now he pretends to be like a guy who asks stupid questions or whatever. He's way smarter than that. That is
for context. I'm a comedian, right?
So
I'm a comedian. I also angel invest, and I have a YouTube channel about learning, about finance, and about gaming. I have 2 different YouTube channels.
I love
right.
that.
So think about that. Now, when that happens, you see people who are actually doing that as a career get really triggered by the fact that, it's like swim in your lane, right? And so I wonder what the relationship between the players of the great online game and the players of the tiny offline game, the mainstream institutions. Like, do you think about that? Is that part of the scope of this?
Yeah, 100%. And this is something that I leaned into yesterday when I was writing as well. Is like, I thought an interesting analogy to draw was the NBA. And there was this incredible quote in the New Yorker last week from an unnamed NBA general manager who essentially said the player empowerment movement, which is like in the NBA, people are forming super teams and the stars are really at the center of things more than they ever have been before. And so he said the player empowerment movement essentially is the worst thing that's ever happened to the league because it gives players all of the leverage. And this is coming from a league where before 1975 in the NBA, a team would draft you and that team then had your rights forever. So you couldn't sign with another team. The team could trade you if they wanted to, but it wasn't up to you. And so on one night when you're a 21-year-old kid, the NBA commissioner calls your name and says where you're going to live for the next 20 years of your life, where you're going to find love, all of those things. And so the league and the teams had all of the power. Now, free agency happened. So that was one step. And then I think social media was another one that just kind of gave players a more direct connection with the fans. And so now the players have all the power, and that's how it should be. They're the product of the league. That is a really good thing. But obviously the institution does not love the fact that, they can't just say, I want that player, and that player. I mean, at least cricket, they have the auction every year, right? So there's a little bit more kind of flexibility there. Players' prices can kind of rise and fall depending on how well they play. But in the NBA, it wasn't like that for a long time. Now it's getting a little bit more fluid. I think that's true with so many things. And if you talked to a venture capitalist, they would have the same quote about the fact that there are a bunch of solo GPs out there now who are going and nibbling and taking little pieces of the deal, and they're not able to hit their ownership targets anymore because the founder wants to let 5 angels who can be strategically valuable in. So I think if you got them drunk and asked them that for a similar quote, they would give you that similar quote, which is oh man, individual investor empowerment is the worst thing that ever happened to venture capital, and now prices are higher and all of that. And that's really great. That's really great for the founders. And the fact that there's more competition for them and more, again, surface area of individuals that can go help tell their story and find customers and all of that.
Yeah. It's probably so upsetting for Adam Silver to see LeBron James lose in the playoffs. Then he comes to the press conference and he plugs a movie that's coming out in the next month. He lost. He didn't make it. LeBron didn't reach the finals. It's in a decade. And he's like, by the way, go watch my movie. That's the next game I'm playing. It's insane.
But it's it's also, I think, it's not going back in the bottle. There's no way that, at some point the institutions are all right, cool, never mind, we controlled this again. I don't see a world in which that happens. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how those dynamics continue to shift.
Oh, it's going to be chaos, right? Institutions and individuals are going to fight, and it's going to be a public, I have this problem with the media, right? I think I say no to talking to journalists all the time now. I say, you need me, I bring the views, my Twitter is my media. And it's upsetting to them, right? And I don't foresee a time where, given an opportunity to take me down, these guys won't use everything that they have. It's going to happen, and I foresee a more chaotic time.
But it's also interesting, this might not be the exact definition of anti-fragile, but I think about this sometimes, where if I get canceled, the core, it's taken me forever to build up my newsletter subscriber base. You can't just reach all those people at the same time. If I got canceled, I would imagine of the 55,000 people who subscribe to NotBoring, 5,000 would actually know about it. And so like I'd have 50,000 subscribers then. Like, and I guess you can hit me from the sponsor angle where maybe like all the sponsors don't want to work with me because I've done something horribly wrong. But I don't know, at least in terms of the audience, like if you build up this like real audience over time, then you do have this kind of built-in protection, I think, against institutions as well.
I think that's an interesting, that's an interesting variable people don't consider, that there's an individual versus institution battle going on. And some parts of the cancel culture are motivated financially as well, right? Like how does that snap into like it snaps in so easily that institutions are able to cancel individuals when they get too big for their shoes or when they start to compete with them. And I think that's probably why the pseudonymous economy is important, because your prominence and Tanmay's prominence in the things that you guys do will only increase, not decrease, right? Like you said, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So I mean, you're racing, like when you're publishing, you're writing effectively. I mean, you're competing with journalists. When you're investing, you're competing with VCs. So you're taking on, a couple of institutions that are pretty large.
Although on the VC side, I think, and actually on the media side, I think, there are groups that like, as I'm thinking about kind of what to do next, I don't think you're allowed to mention that you're raising a fund by laws, but as I'm thinking about what I do next, there are VCs and GPs of VCs who are involved in that, and I think there are some investors who want to play nice with individuals because they see the value they can bring. I think there are some media brands that certainly like either collaborate with or hire and then really feature. So like Morning Brew, I think, does a very good job of making its individual contributors kind of the stars of the show. I think On Deck does a good job of this with its kind of program leaders. I think that even, the New York Times, it's so funny because they play it in a couple of different ways. Like one, they're very kind of like pro institution side, but then they also go out and pay a ton of money and give a lot of shine to people like Ezra Klein or whoever else. So, they're also understanding that you need, or Taylor Lorenz or whoever, like, are getting a lot of shine as individual people within this kind of big institution that has always been the brand itself. So I think, it'll be interesting to see how that happens over time as well, because I think it's going to have to be this collaboration between the two.
It's this bizarre line between, when people who usually play the wealth game, like especially VCs, right? Like, and then they get affected by this bizarre status game. Like, I just don't understand people who don't realize that, hey, there's enough money for everyone to go around. There's no reason for you to fight over this petty status nonsense, right?
Yes, for sure. And I think there are plenty of people who realize that as well and are adapting their style of play to account for that. Like, I think, probably more funds will give up their precise ownership targets and optimize for outcome and all of that. So
got it. So heading to the next part of the essay, which was meet the players. So who are playing these games, and do we know any prominent players?
Yeah, so I think the most prominent player is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And I wrote this before he started promoting Cum Rocket and all of that. So he's like maybe gone off the rails a little bit on the game, but like he does wrote this, like he does these things in the physical world that seem impossible and like really do seem like you can only do when you're actually you're in a simulation and how to play the simulation. Like, how does the same person build the most valuable car company in the world, the most promising kind of space technology company in the world, potentially transform energies? Like, all of that in the physical world is impossibly hard, and he's doing multiple of them at the same time. And then online, like, coming in, this was kind of like right off the tails of SNL, where he was like almost kind of at the peak of his power. He just has this huge audience of people who loved anything that he did. I think he's probably lost the Bitcoin maximalist at this point, but still has this like massive group of fans who will kind of do whatever he wants. But there's also, like Lil Nas X, I think, is a phenomenal example of just kind of using the internet to go from a closet in Georgia to having to
every song being number one on Billboard Top 100, right? Every song,
right? And he did that all with the internet, and all by just being like a shit poster and a meme lord and like all of those things. And then over time, he's like now he's one of the few prominent out rappers and prominent gay rappers, and like has just played this game to a point where like he must have been petrified to come out when he was a nobody in a closet in Georgia, but now he has this audience and the support, and like he's almost kind of untouchable. And so you can like really kind of promote, you can be your full self when you've hit that point. So I think he's an interesting one. I love Alex Danko as a writer, and there's like this beautiful map in the piece if you go check it out. But he like drew out in pen. He's a better artist than I would have expected, but drew out like the map to Danko Land, which is like all these different things that he's been interested in and people that he talks to. He used the internet to go from, he was at Social Capital, then he went out on his own and was kind of writing, and then used that to find an incredible job at Shopify. But even with that, now he's like joined the Inner Intellect and will go on Jim O'Shaughnessy's podcast as a recurring guest. And so he's like found his thing. He achieved like kind of, what a decade ago would have been like the goal, which is getting a job at one of the most valuable, fast-growing companies in the world, but then kind of continues just to play the game in new ways that are non-competitive with his main thing. So I think that those are a few of the interesting examples out there.
There seem to be like 3 levers, right? Or tell me if there are more. One is media. The other is, I guess, creative output. And the third is capital. And if you, are there any other, like what's in the joystick,
Yeah, I think there's a ton more than that. And I think if that came across in the piece, that's because those are kind of my levers. And so I probably overemphasized those. But like there are people who, are joining DAOs, like I mentioned, and like they're, not social. They don't want to write, they whatever, but they do want to say like, hey, this new protocol that we're thinking about investing in, I'm going to rip apart the white paper and the technical specs and all of that, and like that will be my contribution. So I think it's less about a particular lever and more about figuring out what you're uniquely really good at and bringing that to the table and finding the spots where that's most valuable.
I was looking at the other examples in the essay, Akshay. Mayor Francis Suarez, right? Like it all began with that tweet. Okay, guys, hear me out. What if we move Silicon Valley to Miami? And he just entered the game with how can I help? And look where it's reached.
Now there's Miami Coin. I mean, like, it's been a crazy few months for the city of Miami. They just hosted the Bitcoin conference. They hosted Miami Tech Week before that. I think there's probably like the interesting thing is like there still is a real world game with real numbers and statistics, and then there's kind of what it seems like online. And so I think Miami's probably making a little more noise than like the actual numbers would suggest it deserves to, or it's doing something smart. Maybe this is like a leading indicator, but more people are moving to New York City from other places than they are to Miami, or to Austin than they are to Miami. But I think like he's attracting just a ton of kind of attention right now and doing some really interesting things with it. And I think like that's another one where, as a city, as an institution in this world where people can move fairly easily. And again, like the big caveat is not everybody, right? Like there are plenty of people who cannot move easily. And I don't want it to come across like everybody in the world can just pick up tomorrow and leave. Like I have a kid. I can't just pick up tomorrow and go wherever I want. And there's plenty of people who are in their own situations that can't do that. But more people now than ever before can pick up when they want to. If they don't like taxation in a certain place, or they don't like the job opportunities there, or their job is making them come into work and they'd rather live on a beach somewhere and work for a company that's remote. So now people have a choice of where they live more than ever. And so cities are starting to have to kind of compete. And it's been interesting to see kind of how, one particular institution, the city of Miami, has chosen to adapt to this and take advantage of the fact that individuals have more agency.
Packy, I have a question for you, right? Like in conventional video games, so every player that joins the game, they all start at the same level. Like everybody starts at level 0 and everybody starts with similar statistics, right? Like, hey, your attack and defense is roughly as much as, my power, attack, defense, or whatever else that is. But some individuals, right, who eventually play the game brilliantly, they will start the game with some element of a superpower, right? Like, for example, I think having excellent articulation skills is a superpower, right?
Yes.
Or in today's game, having humor is a superpower. So, what according to you are 3 like superpowers that can truly help you play the game better?
This is going to be a cop-out answer. I agree with both of yours, but I think there's so many, again, I think it's about just leaning into the thing, like almost being super nerdy about the thing that you're super nerdiest about, I think can be a superpower just because niches online are so massive. So you'll see people who
Curiosity,
and then like just really like demonstrated kind of expertise in something. Like, there are people who have a picture of, a dead person who work at a hedge fund and don't want to identify themselves, who come online and just start spitting like really brilliant stuff. Or there's like, I'm picturing the one Twitter profile, like Compound Something, who has a picture of like a yellow graph, and he rose to prominence on Twitter by breaking down kind of like the guts in the plumbing of the DTCC during the Robinhood thing. And he had this big thread breaking down what happens behind the scenes. And he gained like thousands and thousands of followers, and now like has leveled up in the game. And that's not a skill that I would have like predicted ahead of time is really good, understanding how kind of like the plumbing of the stock market works. But like if you're really knowledgeable about one thing and willing to share that thoughtfully, then I think like that's like the meta superpower here.
I have a slightly darker question to follow up to that. What happens to folks who don't play the game?
I think plenty of like. It depends what you're optimizing for, right? Like, I do think that obviously, like, just generally, game or no game, the wealth gap is widening, and if you're not using technology to your advantage, like, people who are just have all of these kind of levers that they can pull that other people can't. And so I think, like, that is something that I don't know what the answer is, but we'll have to figure out an answer for. But I think there's plenty of people who are totally happy working a 9-to-5 job, forgetting about work when they go home, turning their brain off, having dinner with their family. Like, that's awesome. Like, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Absolutely.
I'm making the assumption, on this piece that anybody who's willing to spend the time, my essays are really long. Like, anyone who's willing to spend the time reading about tech and Web3 and all of that for like an hour a week reading my stuff, like, they probably are interested in playing this. So it's written towards kind of like that audience. But there are plenty of people who are probably like, this guy's an idiot. Like, why does he care so much about these tech companies or crypto or like whatever? I am like really happy because I went on a hike yesterday and I didn't bring my phone and it was amazing. And so like, I think, different strokes for different folks, 100%. This is written towards an audience of people who are like very clearly are online and want to work, work in or around kind of tech and investing.
Yeah, I think all of us secretly wish we could leave our phones behind and enjoy a hike and have the ability to do that. Why? I think, but do you think it becomes the only game in town? I think that's, like you look at what has happened after COVID, like the returns for working inside a company, let's say you're 21, 22 right now, if you have obligations, then, you have a family, you have different priorities, which is fine. But somebody starting out in their career is offered a menu of options, right? And that menu is typically colored with options from a pre-2020 world. A lot of which is just join a company or, things like this that may not be as feasible in a post-COVID world. So I don't know, do you have some advice for someone who's early in their career and has the opportunity to take some risks?
Yeah. Again, I mean, I think it's leaning into the thing that you're like, the interesting thing about this is the more that you play and the more that you lean into a particular thing, the more you're kind of setting yourself on that kind of course. So I think like one of the biggest mistakes people can make in the beginning is saying like, I don't really care about this thing, but it seems like people online respond to it, and maybe I'll get a lot of followers if I do X, Y, or Z thing. And if you're not interested in it, like, oh shit, now you have 10,000 followers who view you as this one thing and who are kind of all interested in this one thing. And so all of your opportunities are in that one thing, but you don't actually want to do that one thing and you don't care about that one thing. Like, I think that's kind of limiting. So I wouldn't make that mistake. I think it's really about bringing like kind of yourself and the things that you're interested in to the table, and like not kind of faking it, because the more you fake it, the more you end up with these like options that just don't align with what you actually want to do. But otherwise, like certainly like, if you're paying off student debt or you don't have any money because you're 21 years old, like it may make sense in a lot of cases to go get a full-time job. And I think like I'm saying this all now as someone who's like a decade plus in and spent time in investment banking and like learned those skills and learned that work ethic. And I think like that has really kind of like helped the fact that I have to sit in a basement and write all the time, that like I was trained to work, 18 hours a day in the beginning of my career. And so I think there are really good things for starting your career inside of an organization as well. But, if I went back and talked to my young self, I would say like definitely have side things more than I did. I was like fully 100% focused on work, and would definitely plant some seeds in other areas that I'm interested in, even with a full-time job.
How does crypto supercharge this game? Yeah, I mean, me and Akshay discussed this a lot, right? Like, it's such an overwhelming feeling to suddenly realize that it's a global game now. It's not a country specific game, because it feels a lot easier to deal with something that you think there's more control over. But now all of a sudden, everyone's just pushed into, hey, everyone can speak to everybody, and everyone's money is connected to everybody. Now play the game. How does crypto supercharge the game?
I mean, I think like the more I think about it, crypto is just kind of these like native tokens for the great online game, or like money that's kind of baked into the internet that people can use, across the internet to reward each other. So I use an example of, I turned one of my posts into an NFT that I sold, and then split the proceeds with all of the people whose work I linked in the piece. And so like without them agreeing to be involved in the piece, without us talking about it ahead of time, like all of a sudden, just because they put something out there, like they're making money. Or, people can join Discord and be rewarded with the tokens for that community, or join a DAO and be rewarded with part ownership in that DAO. And all of a sudden, like they're making money. Or, there's super active Discords of people full of people who are like ex-finance people, startup employees, who are now spending all of their time just going down the rabbit hole and trading together. If you look a step back, it's not crypto, but like a Wall Street Bets is like an insane example of this whole phenomenon, where people are moving around real money and using almost like they're almost treating their dollars like crypto a little bit, I think, in the GameStop situation, or like they're buying something else than like obviously than the underlying cash flows in the business. Like they're buying education and belonging and like all of those other types of things. But I think more and more, as just money and tokens are baked into different dynamics, you can like literally accumulate wealth for going and popping in and contributing to different places in a way that's like not really possible. Like you could sign a contractor agreement, send somebody a W-9 and like do all of those things, but like there's too much friction there to do that like in a bunch of one-off ways. In this way, that you can go add your unique contribution to something, get rewarded for it in real time, bounce to the next place, get rewarded again. And so I think like it's all just becoming a little bit more liquid, and people are able to do many things at the same time. And I think crypto facilitates that in a pretty big way.
Yeah, I mean, like imagine somebody sees an old video or reads an old blog, they can go tip the author. Like it's perpetually it just doesn't attract perpetual eyeballs, but also perpetual money, right? If it continues to remain relevant, that's super interesting. In fact, one of the reasons we started Super Pumped was because we said, hey, if I were to frame it in the way that you did in terms of the great online game versus the offline game, our general idea for Super Pumped is that people in cities, like in the major metro cities, will have a hangover of the opportunities from a pre-2020 world, and those opportunities will be very good, right? So they'll be incredibly good. What is, however, happened in the non-metro cities is those opportunities have dwindled. Their ability to move to these cities has reduced because of the lack of mobility, but the great online game has just opened up. Right, totally. And so they're native players of the great online game, and we interview them once a week on this podcast. And I'm just like, I have an ear-to-ear grin every time I talk to them, because they haven't even played the other game. Like, you came from finance, I came from tech, Tanmay came from entertainment, and we all have a hangover of something. And
what that game was like.
They're just native.
And they're like 22, and they have $10 billion of value locked in something that they built at home, and they're sitting right next to their mother who doesn't believe what they're doing, and it's insane. What's
100%. And even like I think the huge wealth part is really interesting and is very price dependent and all of that. But I think like the more sustainable thing, hopefully with crypto, is just like that there are rewards baked into a lot of things, and like I don't know, I think. The interesting thing about it to me is that it rewards participation, of course, and that I'm trying to think about the best way to say this without like it's not.
You've actually already framed this beautifully in the context of the great online game. There are points when I say they, I mean tokens. There are points that reward good gameplay across the internet and give followers an incentive to join and support a team wherever it is. I thought that was very well framed.
Right, and I think I'm not like a very like anti-institution person. Like you've heard me say, like I think that people and institutions should work together. I think that Facebook played the last game really well, and like they have one of the world's best money printing machines, and like good on them. But I think the interesting thing is that if you look at kind of Facebook's profits in a given quarter or a given year, like that's the opportunity pool for all of the people who are playing. So like a lot of people are like, where does all this crypto money come from, right? But like the profit pools of platforms, like pools, yeah. If it goes to all the people kind of who are involved instead of one central thing, like that's a potential profit pool for Web3. And so I think that's really interesting, is that like if you participate, you can start getting kind of some of those rewards.
Yeah. Like I like to frame it as like similarly in the old days of the media, right? There was, Rupert Murdoch, right? With all these distribution channels. So today I think of my YouTube earnings as I am eating into the profit pool of Rupert Murdoch. Like YouTube is eating into the profit pool of Rupert Murdoch. So technically I am a part of that, right?
Yes.
So when you think about it this way, you realize how much money there is in the world, and in the old world, how little of that was actually trickling down to you compared to the amount of value you were providing to it.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right.
Crypto supercharges this game purely because it makes, barrier to entry becomes, there's almost no barrier to entry. Anyone can enter it, and hence it's going to be high chaos, but there's got to be, asymmetric returns, probability of asymmetric returns. For a lot of people, lack of knowledge will be punished, knowledge will be rewarded, and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically the online game, but on steroids.
Totally. And there's more things that, like as AI gets better and it's easier to track people's actual contributions, like there's something maybe a little dystopian about that for sure, but there's also something great that like, you can't just get a job through politics and hold it forever and be rewarded for that. Like you're almost kind of constantly judged on your actual contribution. And as our ability to kind of define and measure contribution gets kind of more precise and better and more real time and all of that, then it'll be easier and easier for people to just like kind of take micro pieces again of like maybe from that profit pool of people who are just in their job because they were there and they're friends with the CEO. Like that's another profit pool that just gets redistributed to people who are actually contributing over time.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I empathize with the individual versus institution thing. It was very attractive in the beginning. I still believe it's the theme. Another theme I think that's underrated is crypto actually takes out middle management, right? In whether that's in companies or organizations generally, that's what it dissolves, right? Because if you look at the people at the top, they got there by making high quality strategic decisions and being good over a long period of time. So you could argue that that's some form of demonstrated success.
Yes.
And typically the people at the who are early in their career who got hired, are probably really good at what they do. And the middle management is simply an information packet service, right? And that's where politics and bureaucracy finds a home, and it kind of really cuts creativity inside organizations, right?
Yeah, previously you'd have to bribe a contract to execute itself, and now you don't have to. Essentially.
Here's a contract that executes itself that's pre-agreed versus you going out for drinks with with your boss and the entire team, and then you're trying to make whenever your boss makes a joke, you've got to laugh or whatever. I don't know, whatever the rules are of organizational advancing lately, because it's post COVID and Zoom. I guess you get on Zoom calls and
laugh,
but it's just. Once you play it, it's just, we were talking actually to the founders of this protocol called Instadap, and they're like, if you asked us to run a company, we wouldn't know how to do it because we just have the community help. Like if you want something, we just post it on a board or like in our Discord, and somebody just goes and does it, and we just reward them with tokens for it. We don't know we don't have an org structure or like we didn't hire managers.
Right. It seems. And like I don't want to dunk on managers too much, because I think there is also like a soft value that they provide in guiding people's careers, and like there is some help and for the right person. Like all of this, I don't want to paint with broad strokes, but yeah, it does seem absolutely crazy that like at your salary or your whatever as a younger employee and your advancement was determined by like contribution, sure, but like whether that person liked you, and then also maybe there's pay bands, and so like you could do a 10 times better work than somebody else and get a 5% pay increase, and so like it just there are all these artificial kind of constraints, I think, on it that hopefully are being removed a little bit.
And just look at the entertainment business, right? For instance, let's say you're hiring an artist for an advertisement, as an example, right? You have an agency that's taking a massive double-digit percentage of that artist's fee just for negotiating on behalf of the artist, right? Whereas in crypto, you would just have a market-determined price in real time based on supply and demand. Right? If let's say the artist had their own tokens and you had to buy 1,000 tokens to get to have them in your ad, right? You'd have a real-time dynamic market price of that, which all of it goes to the artist. So I'm not really, I'm not, taking shots at the middle management layer of companies or anything, but I do think that I definitely think that there are much less efficient way of passing down or distributing value that is created.
Totally. I think there's this interesting thing, like, you'll probably lose some quality in like the you'll miss something that a professional agent or negotiator or somebody would have negotiated for you. But there's this value to speed and just continuing to kind of iterate and do things that I think vastly overwhelms trying to get every point that you can in the short term. If you just I worked with this really smart guy, Ben, who now runs a company called Composer. But when we worked together at Breather, he at some point was like, man, we're making decisions kind of slowly. I'm just going to run a model. He was head of our data science team. So run a model on what % you have to be right for it just to make sense to move faster. And where more decisions overwhelms perfect decisions. And it's a fairly low percentage where if you get things right kind of most of the time, it's just way better to do that more often and move faster than it is to make the perfect decision much more slowly.
Yeah, and if you get the more times you get the right decision, the more likely you will get it right the next time as well,
sure.
Right? So there's value in numbers, right? So going through multiple feedback loops, essentially it's just refining your
definitely.
judgment.
I'll say one last thing on this, which is that a lot of people want to be working creative jobs, right? They may not. There may be somebody in a bloated organization who's maybe in the middle layers who has other interests and passions that can get unlocked if they just started playing the great online game. So this is equally an opportunity for them to think about.
100%. If you were kind of coasting in your job, you have a lot of time at work, just a lot of time during the day to spend on Twitter or whatever else.
And I would say that financially speaking, if you just joined a large organization and saved money in Bitcoin for the last 10 years, you probably outperformed anybody who worked at any startup pretty much in the last 10 years. So this is in no way to say that 9-to-5 jobs are not lucrative. It's just it's certainly just a frame on better alternatives emerging.
Yes, for sure.
Coming to the last part of the essay, Packy, how to play the game. We've discussed the game. Could you take us through how you think people should
and
play?
how you play the game?
Yeah, so we've touched on some of it, but we just before I'd written this post, we on Twitter Spaces had a conversation with Harley Finkelstein, who's the president of Shopify, and he said that essentially the cost of failure or the downside of failure right now is lower than it's ever been, and he's talking about kind of entrepreneurs where you can spin up a Shopify store, try something, use a contract manufacturer, every piece of the supply chain is kind of there off the shelf. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you go try another thing, and that's totally fine. So the cost of failure is lower than ever. And I think that's true kind of more broadly than e-commerce, obviously. And so I think if you apply kind of the same mentality to just go out and start doing it, and if you fail, that's totally fine. One of the hardest things for me to get over in the beginning of writing was what if this thing isn't perfect, and what if people think that I'm an idiot for writing it and all that. And then you realize particularly in the beginning, there's almost no pressure, right? Nobody's reading it anyway. And so if I write the dumbest thing in the world, it goes out to 50 people. It doesn't really matter that I've written the dumbest thing in the world. Now, the stakes are raised, but I've had more practice, so it kind of plays well. But, I think to me, it's, again, figuring out the thing that you're most kind of curious in, or that you want to be a generalist and you really want to float around and have a bunch of different conversations. It all depends on what you want to do with it. Or again, you can just be broadly curious, and then go start finding either people who are broadly curious. I mentioned Alex Danko's in the Inner Intellect. So maybe you want to just join a community like that, where a different day is going to bring a totally different thing for you to think about, and that's what you love. Maybe you find something that's super niche and you love mechanical keyboards and you go like find the people on Twitter who are interested in mechanical keyboards or on Reddit who are interested in mechanical keyboards and like dive in there.
That's a huge community, by the way, of mechanical keyboard enthusiasts.
But you know, like, there's so many communities that seem like there's probably 6 people in the world who are interested in that, and then there's like, like 10 million people in the world who are interested in that thing. And so like find it that you're interested in, go like start kind of figuring out where those people spend time, start adding value a little bit in the conversation. Like don't expect to get 1 million followers immediately, or that you're going to be the star of the show. I don't think, you know, you should spend a lot of time like going and correcting people. That's not a great way to make friends online. Like, but really just kind of adding, like, you know, I think for, you know, you're a comedian, like the improv thing of yes end, like if you can kind of yes end a lot of things on the internet with like, holy shit, that's really cool. I also like thought about this one particular thing, and like, you know, just start kind of joining the conversation and taking that over to a Discord and like becoming part of a group and just kind of evolving from there. Like, I think that's the best way to dive in. Like find the thing that you're like the absolute nerdiest about, and then find the other people who are really, really nerdy about that thing and just start kind of talking to them.
Awesome. I think we've covered every aspect of the essay, except I think I'd want to jump into the 4 elements of successful game design. You actually briefly mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation. I mean the 4 elements are feedback loops, variable outcome, sense of control, and connection to the metagame. Packy, if you could take us through this one
for sure.
One
so
last time.
Feedback loops first is like this idea that you'll try something and then you'll see if it works, and then you'll iterate and you'll try and you'll iterate and you'll see if it works. And so that can be, you know, you can go out and start trading crypto and getting wrecked and seeing that like, maybe that didn't work. Like next time I'm going to be a little bit smarter about the trade. Or it can mean jumping into, you know, tweeting something and being like, oh man, nobody responded to that one. Like, or, you know, people responded and said this was dumb. Like, maybe I won't say things like that as much, unless you really believe it, in which case just lean in and that's your online thing. But you have the opportunity, once you have a certain amount of followers, like if you have 0 followers, you're not going to get much feedback. But if you have 100, you'll start getting feedback on the things that you put out there and just kind of iterating and learning kind of the style. And what works on Twitter is different than what works on Reddit, is different than what works within a community on Discord. And so like kind of figure out the kind of social norms of each one of the platforms and figure out the things that you put out there that work just based on feedback. Variable outcomes
is self-explanatory. I mean, the feedback that comes will be variable, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think just even going back to the last one for a second, like I wrote a piece on Snap a while back that did really well on Twitter, and then I brought it into Wall Street Bets and got absolutely shit on. Like they just like completely dunked on me. They're like, tell me what to buy right now. You're a boomer. Blah, blah, like this is too many words. Like what the hell is wrong with you? And so like that's interesting feedback as well, where it's like, cool. All right. Like I'm not going to change how I feel about Snapchat for this community, but like I'll probably change how I express it next time in this community. Like I'll say, all right, great. Like just buy, I don't know, like weekly calls on Snap and YOLO or something. You know, it's a different mediums and different groups have different cultures, and like you do well to understand what those different things are. Variable outcomes, I think, is like kind of very related, where, you know, it's boring if I knew that I tweet something right now, I get 100 likes and 6 people respond, and every time I tweet, no matter what I tweet, 100 likes, 6 responses, maybe 2 retweets, and that's the same every time. Like there's something fun in going out and not knowing every time you do something what's going to happen. I think that's one of the reasons that like, you know, a traditional job would bore me, is that like you kind of know that if you go in and, you know, you're in an operations job and operations work smoothly, like you'll get a 3% increase and there you go.
Anticipation dopamine is very addictive, right?
Totally.
Which is why I think I like to do many different things, because the time taken for the feedback loop in each game that you're playing is variable. Like investing, it takes very long to know for one feedback loop to complete, right? But tweeting, on the other hand, is the feedback loop that happens 10 times a day. So you need a bit of both.
100%. Yes, I think that's totally right. And even within investing, you could break it down and say like, cool, I have no idea if this company is going to exit for 7 years, but I do know if a founder finds me valuable and will recommend me to other founders, and if I'm a useful person to have on the cap table, and if other investors I respect think that I was an idiot for making this investment. Like, so you can get all these different types of feedback loops even within the same thing. So the next one is sense of control. And I think like there's something, you know, this is not easy. Like, I think a lot of this sounds like I'm calling it a game. I'm talking about spending time on Twitter. I write a free newsletter full time as my profession. Like, it kind of sounds like easy and jokey. I put so much work into all of this. And I think like there's something that comes from that sense that like the more you put in, the more you're going to get out. And I think like if that dynamic breaks, that's when like I think mentally it can be kind of tough almost to be like, man, I just like sit here and I said something dumb and I just made $1 million. Like, I think at that point, like it's really hard, it's really easy to lose your sense of reality and your sense of like anything being meaningful or any sense of accomplishment. So I think there has to be some dynamic of like, yes, I'm actually going to like put time and effort into this thing and I'll be rewarded for the quality of the work that I put in. And then the last one is the connection to the metagame. And we've talked about this, and this is kind of the whole point of the whole thing, is that you're doing all these things that kind of feel game-like online that ultimately kind of add up to real-world consequences and jobs and money and friendships and relationships, and all of these things come from, you know, essentially how you manipulate objects on a screen.
I love that framing. It's such a comedian way of framing it, which is just really describing in a very almost like per unit of what's happening, right? Like it's
yeah, exactly.
It's beautifully put. Packy, I love this essay, and I would recommend every single one who's watching this to please go check it out. We're going to link it in the description. Do check out Packy's newsletter. And if there's any other resource that you would think people should check out, Packy, you should let us know. We're going to link that in the description as well. And any startups that you've invested in, that you're excited about, that people should go check out, please tell us about those right now.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, so it's for the Indian audience. I did Pesto Tech. If you're interested in engineering and getting a job with a U.S. company or a company around the globe, Pesto Tech will help make that happen. So essentially, they're a talent marketplace for engineers. Less focused on the engineering side, actually, in terms of the training, because there's a lot of incredible engineering talent in India anyway. And it's more about kind of the cultural pieces of how you work in a team inside of a company, particularly focused on the US right now, but will expand as well. So Pesto, I think, is a really relevant one for this audience.
Awesome. Guys, do check out Pesto Tech. We're going to link it in the description. Akshay, do you want to add something?
No, this was a fantastic conversation, and Packy, I hope we can have you back again to discuss
the new essay that just dropped yesterday.
Exactly, and we'll link that in the description as well. But man, that's a banger, and as crypto develops, I would, it'd be awesome to have you back on and talk about. What you're doing next, because I feel like you teased an announcement there, and we're super glad you could make time for us.
Absolutely. It was so fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Packy. Thank you.